Today is the fourth day of this 21 days water fast, water only 24/7. Now, one of my study resources is a gentleman called Sam Solane, and I've just read something that has completely shifted my thinking about marriage. Now, these are the fresh depths of God that we're talking about this fast. Now, listen to this. The submission of a wife to a husband is designed to instruct the husband how to behave toward Christ, since in the husband's role as part of the bride of Christ, he is required to submit to Christ in the same way that his wife is required to submit to him. When I read that, I had to read it again. The submission of a wife to a husband is designed to instruct the husband how to behave toward Christ, since in the husband's role as part of the bride, he is required to submit to Christ in the same way that his wife is required to submit to him. Both husband and wife are sons of God. Now, in just reading that, certain deep shifts took place inside of me as far as my view of marriage is concerned. That's the fresh depths of God. That's where we go through this deep water fast. Now, he goes on to say, within the configuration of marriage involving a husband and a wife, the eternal picture of Christ and the church is presented as bringing the values of the rule of Christ and the submission of the church within reach of those marriages that might benefit from observing the model. In that regard, marriage is holy because the rule of the husband is deliberately designed to depict the reality of Christ as husband who puts the interests of his wife ahead of his own life and elicits the response from a wife worthy of such boundless love, namely a complete trust of his motives. I mean, have you ever thought about this? We depict the reality of Christ as husbands who put the interest of their wives ahead of their own lives. This is absolutely amazing. The husband trusts that his determination to fashion his rule after the example of Christ is designed to honor the character of Christ by putting it on display through the sacrifice of his own interest. His belief is that because Christ is real, the outcomes of his rule will enjoy the support of the presence of Christ. Similarly, the wife who submits to a husband makes herself vulnerable, of course. A representation of the bride of Christ submitting to Christ affords a husband contact with that reality that is capable of transforming him into becoming part of the obedient bride. Now listen to this. This is absolutely mind-boggling. Absent her example, the husband has no real chance of learning to submit to Christ and is thus excluded from availing himself of all the benefits that come from being positioned accurately in Christ. I mean, this guy is redefining marriage. I mean, we've heard husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church, and wives submit to your husbands, and we kind of leave it at there. Then we conform that to how we understand marriage from society. But no, that is not it at all. I mean, for me, I just stopped and I shared this with my wife and I said, man, I'm beginning to understand how you function completely differently. I'll read this again. Similarly, the wife who submits to a husband makes herself vulnerable. A representation of the bride of Christ submitting to Christ affords a husband contact with that reality that is capable of transforming him into becoming part of the obedient bride of Christ. Absent her example, he has no real chance of learning to submit to Christ and is thus excluded from availing himself of all the benefits that come from being positioned accurately in Christ. He goes on to say, in the kingdom, the reality is that the marriage model itself becomes holy because it is deliberately set apart to house the purposes of God. Now, I don't know when you guys got married if you even thought about this at all. And actually, it doesn't matter what you thought about when you got married or what you thought about up to now. Here is how Christ sees the marriage. Guy says, Solane says, the reality is that the marriage model itself becomes holy because it is deliberately set apart to house the purposes of God. Therefore, underline this, marriage among believers is incomparable to all other forms of union between two people. In the kingdom, husbands and wives enter into marriage with the specific intent of displaying the glory of the relationship between Christ and the church, that's Christ's bride, and the results of happiness and well-being attained in greater and more lasting ways than just marriage as a form. Guys, if you look into restructure, rebuild, enhance your marriage, you got to understand this. In the kingdom, our marriages are designed to house the purposes of God. And we enter into marriage with the specific intent of displaying the glory of the relationship between Christ and the church. And the results of this kind of marriage, that's the happiness and well-being attained in greater and more lasting ways than just marriage as a form. Doesn't matter, I can speak to you as a coach, where you are with your marriage, how you got into it. But if both of you are sons of God, you have to align yourselves to this. And you do this knowing we have the mind of Christ, we have the serpent spirits of God. You got to engage deep water fasting. You ain't going to die. This is our 4th day, and we're super strong. Now, finally, he says that marriage should be a context in which a wife recognizes the authority of the husband and submits to it. And listen to this, I'm speaking to the guys now, and that the husband lays down his life for his wife. It is not a model that is advisable for anyone other than those who have been properly taught and prepared for such a concept of marriage. So it's not a marriage prepared for those who are not sons of God, but I'm speaking to sons of God now. Guys, I am just super excited at these fresh depths of God. It's only day 4. Imagine day 6, day 10, 15, 20, 21. Stay in track and keep tracking us. We'll catch up with you. Name is George Nyabadza. See you soon.